we know this story pretty well. We're in Daniel chapter 3, and it's the part about the fiery furnace and all those other types of things. And so it's actually got a lot of material today, so we might be here a while, and that's okay because we're not having the Hebrew class afterwards. Just an FYI. But it's going to get ready a little bit because it might be a little bit long. But we started with Daniel. We were looking at the integrity amid collapse and what that looked like, where he was deciding and choosing who he was going to be, how he was going to live, and he had his convictions amid all that compromise that was around him about eating from the king's table and not being seduced by the free stuff. We talked about his godly counsel amid all of that falsehood that's out there in the world, all that wisdom, all that knowledge and education and all those things that wants to try to provide answers, but it really cannot. And then how God will reveal His Word even amid unbelief, even to an unbeliever. He will show what He is about to do. And so today we're also looking at faith amid these fiery trials. Because that's the next step in all of these things, in the experience of these Jewish people in the kingdom of Babylon. And in many ways, it's some of the things that we can be expecting in our own lives in the days ahead. So faith amid fiery trials. If y'all have been in trials or are going through trials, you need to know what kind of faith we need to have in the midst of all of those, and what kind of things that we can be expecting in the days ahead if things continue the way they look like they are. We talked a lot about him. This is Nebuchadnezzar. And seeing what kind of person he was, and looking at the previous chapters, it says, Daniel's talking, he says, "To you, O king, as you lay on your bed, came thoughts about what will come to pass in the future. And the revealer of mysteries has made known to you what is going to happen." In verse 31 it says, "You looked, O king, and behold, there before you stood a huge statue, an enormous and dazzling image whose appearance was awesome." The head of that statue was of pure gold. The breast and its arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet partly iron and partly clay. He says in verse 36, "This was the dream, and now we will tell the king its interpretation." You, O king, are the King of kings, to whom God, the God of heaven, has given sovereignty, power, might, and glory. Wherever mankind, beasts of the field, and fowls of the heavens dwell, He has given them into your hand and made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. All right, and we looked at that a good bit last week. The image that he talked about, and how really the important thing is not so much the statue, it's not so much all the different nations, but it's about the stone, and it's about what God is doing even in the midst of all of those kingdoms and nations that think they are all so powerful. But he says in verse 39, he says, "Now after you another kingdom will arise, one inferior to yours. Next a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over all the earth. Finally there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron. And for iron shatters and breaks everything. And just as iron smashes everything, so will it shatter and crush all of the others." Now, if you're the king and you're listening to this, all of a sudden something's going to catch your attention, and you're going to want to stop and go back and check on that. So I'm going to show you the Nebuchadnezzar translation of what Daniel just said. He says, this is what he heard. "Now after you another kingdom will arise, one inferior to yours." And he's like, wait, what did you just say? After me? Does that mean I'm going to die? Does that mean my kingdom is destroyed? Everything else after that is just nothing. Blah, 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 blah. He's not hearing much of that, because what he heard is, wait a minute, after you. What do you mean after me? We all have a tendency to think that I'm going to live forever, right? This is not going to end. My life is going to continue on. And so he is sitting there, and all of a sudden Daniel has his attention. And so many people interpret, what happens after Daniel gives the dream, and what happens when he, does everything correctly, gives him the interpretation correctly. So many interpret this moment from Nebuchadnezzar when he responds almost as a statement of faith or belief or some sort of, man, this God is something awesome. An exaltation of the God of Daniel. And I talked about it last week a bit like that, and that's certainly a possibility. But studying about it this week, when we get to this moment, it struck me, what if it's not necessarily the case? Because most people, in most religions, most of these false beliefs and things have taught that thought of the gods as being with whom they can negotiate, right? They can carry favor. They can do things to bribe them. They can do things to get them on their side, to change their mind, and do all those other kinds of things. So Nebuchadnezzar could have heard that and been thinking, well, why would this God show me this vision of the future if he's not enticing me to pay him homage, to make him offerings, and maybe even change the outcome of the dream and the vision? Surely this new God is willing to negotiate. Right? So read that passage, read this passage in light of Nebuchadnezzar not necessarily believing and trusting in him, but wanting to enter into negotiations. So the king Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and paid homage to Daniel and gave orders that an offering and incense be provided for him. And in response, the king said to Daniel, "Surely your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and the revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this secret, when none of my other leaders, none of my other astrologers, sorcerers, and diviners could tell me anything." So then the king promoted Daniel and lavished on him many marvelous gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief over all the wise men of Babylon. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the administration of the province of Babylon, while Daniel remained at the royal court. Does that feel a little different if you think about it in terms of like a negotiation? Yes, Daniel said that the dream is certain and its interpretation is trustworthy, but he's on the totem pole of things. Daniel's just a small guy. He's just a servant of this God. He's a slave. He really has no power to change anything, to negotiate with this God. He's just this messenger. But me, I'm Nebuchadnezzar. I'm the King of Kings. He's given me all of this sovereignty. He's given me all of this power and authority. So we must be on good terms. And so if I play my cards right, I should be able to convince this God of Daniel to allow my kingdom to continue forever and not come to an end. And so in order to demonstrate this hope and this goal, this negotiation, I'm going to promote his servant Daniel. I'm going to treat him great and make him, I'm going to woo him with all of my riches. I am even going to set up this great statue, just like my dream, in honor of Daniel's God, and I'll demonstrate that the future that I want to happen and not the one that the dream said was going to happen. See how this works? So King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, counselors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the authorities of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar, the king, had set up. Now again, a lot of interpreters, a lot of commentaries will try to say that this is an image of Nebuchadnezzar because that's how vain and how self-focused he is. He is the head of gold after all. But could this be his attempt at making an idol for Daniel's God? Because that's the way it normally works. That's the way things normally happen. That's what he knows. That's what he understands, the system that he lives in. And to this great and amazing plan that he's come up with, of, you know what, I'm going to change the outcome of the dream. I'm going to negotiate with God, this God. I'm going to bribe this God. I'm going to set up this great image to this God in order to change his mind. What do you think his new advisor, his new chief over all the wise men, Daniel, has to say about that idea? Is he a thumbs up to that idea? Or is he saying, that's a terrible idea? Don't do that at all. My God abhors idolatry. He doesn't want an idol to represent him. He could even tell him, my people have done that before, and about 3,000 people died when we tried it. But Nebuchadnezzar, he's the king. And he knows better. He's going to keep going forward with his brilliant plan to change the future, to which Daniel could say something along the lines of, this is not going to turn out the way you think, and I have a very bad feeling about this, so I'm going to stay in the royal court, and I'm not going out there with you to join you in that endeavor. So first, Nebuchadnezzar is either forgetting, or he is rejecting, or he is hoping to change the revelation of God, to change the Word of God. And that doesn't usually work over so well. Changing the Word of God makes ourselves, again, the center of attention. It makes us the authority because we are changing it to suit our own desires. And so we gather around ourselves teachers and advisors who will tickle our ears and give us what we want to hear. And so changing the Word of God, changing the revelation of God, in this case, the vision of that statue. But isn't that true also for trying to change the Scriptures as a whole? It's a very dangerous thing to try to change the Word of God. And it causes, when we try that, when a nation tries that, when a people tries that, when we do that kind of thing, it causes an increasing spiral into greater and greater idolatry and false worship. And so a whole new religion, a whole new belief system has jumped up out of nowhere. It's created this new ethic, this new standard has been set up that takes you on a different path away from God and his ways. That happens when you try to change his word. But this new religion, this new belief system, this new thing is not a tolerant and free-thinking system. Because conformity to the new belief system, forced worship is required as a test of loyalty. You have to go along with all of this. You have to participate with all of this. So we see that in chapter 3, verse 4. It says, "Then the herald loudly proclaimed, 'You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up.'" Is there anybody exempt from this? No. Everybody over whom he has authority, peoples, nations, and languages. You must fall down and worship this golden image. And he says, "Whoever does not fall down and worship will that same hour be thrown into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire." And so in order to function in this new order, you have to believe the right things. You have to accept the right things. You have to confess the right things and do the right things. Does that sound familiar at all? There has to be a conformity of belief and understanding, and you're not allowed to deviate from that. Otherwise, you will be pressured, persecuted, prosecuted, and purged. And this is the cycle I want to show you. This is a cycle of conformity that's really out there, and we're seeing a lot of this. Okay? And it's a floating cycle that will be able to go backwards and forwards to any part at any time. So first, you're going to be pressured to conform and go along with it, to get with the program. I remember, my wife will probably not be too happy about this memory, but I remember one time when we were still in seminary going to a Texas-Oklahoma game in Dallas. And Texas, and I went with my big, cowbell that I have. If you haven't seen or heard that, it's really loud and really obnoxious. And yes, I can be really loud and really obnoxious at times. But the thing is, though, in the midst of wearing the clothes that I was wearing and having the obnoxious cowbell that I had, the tickets that I had came from friends that went to Oklahoma. So guess which side of the stadium I was sitting on? Because we were sitting on, yes, I put her in danger. Because if you've ever seen the Texas-Oklahoma game, half the stadium is red, half the stadium is burnt orange. Well, we were sitting not on the burnt orange side, we were sitting on the Oklahoma red side. And what was even more interesting is that we didn't show up until after halftime, because we were doing some band-related things. I was helping at a high school in the area with their marching season and such like that. But, I was sitting on the OU side, surrounded by very sad and mentally disturbed Oklahoma fans. And there was a lot of pressure for me to sit there, be quiet, and not make a lot of noise. That's pressure. Because if I started making a lot of noise or cheering at the wrong time, guess what kind of looks I was getting? It was not very happy. And I took Vicky into that. Can you believe that? She's still here too. She's still with me, of all things. But you think of the situation in America today, the kind of pressure that's going on out there in the world, in the country, regarding just all sorts of different types of things, be it the COVID-19 and the mask, the Black Lives Matter and critical race theory, the elections, the impeachment, global warming. Is there pressure to do certain things publicly, to be on the right side of certain issues or have the correct and right opinion or belief? Is there pressure out there on those things? Yes or no? Yeah, there sure is. But if you don't fold and go along with it, what comes next? If you refuse to bow to the pressure, then comes the persecution. Persecution follows with public shaming or ridicule, the loss of friends, the loss of family, maybe the loss of job, maybe the ability to make a living. What's called doxing, where you release a person's information on the internet, so everybody knows where you live, everybody knows what your phone number is. There's something called swatting that's out there. Have y'all heard of that? That's where somebody calls the police and says, "You're holding hostages and they're about to kill everybody in your house. Send the police right away." And they come in charging through the door because they think it's an emergency. That's part of what's going on with the deplatforming, being shut out of financial markets or banks, the whole cancel culture things. That's going on. If you have the wrong opinion, you can't work for Disney these days. So the news will lump you in with the worst crimes in history, with the genocide, with racism, with Nazism, and all those other types of things. And so they will persecute you for not bowing to the pressure. And if that doesn't work, then it moves on to punishment or being prosecuted. That's where the legal system of this new belief system comes down on those nonconformists. Those backwards, subversive types, they're going to be taken to court, they're going to be arrested, they're going to be charged, rounded up, and re-educated. And if it continues from there, it goes to being purged or removed. Anyone, be they commoner or celebrity, company, local, multinational, not complying can end up with removal or purging from public life, where you're unable to do business or to buy or to sell. Are we seeing anything like this cycle? Because remember, it can go around and around more than once and in different back and forth. Are we seeing anything like that? I was talking to a couple of my chaplains with work, and they started me on another way of looking at it. Starting out with, if you dare to disagree with this new system, this new belief, or this new morality, or whatever else, they're going to start by discrediting you and trying to make you look bad and say, well, what of an idiot you are. And then they'll move on to, you're going to be divested of resources or rights, and you're not going to be able to function properly or normally in society. And then it goes to another thing of arrest or detention, and then ultimately to destruction. That is the pattern. I was just part of a call of updating about COVID the other day, and it revealed a lot of things in my mind, especially about the limitations of the vaccines and how the authorities are planning on using it. And they also talked about those who refuse to go along with and get vaccinated. They just needed some additional education. They just needed some additional incentive to get them on board. Because any sane and reasonable and educated person will all do it. Right? That's what's being spoken of out there. But they left it kind of ambiguous as to what's going to happen if you still don't. They didn't really want to say what the next step was. And that was kind of concerning to me. But notice this. He sets up this golden idol. And when you are told, you had better fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. So obviously we don't have a giant golden image in our country right now, but this kind of activity, this kind of pressure is happening. And it says, whoever does not fall down and worship will that same hour be thrown into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. That's the purging, that's the destruction. That is being the removal of things. So you conform and you get with the program and stop being so selfish. This is a test of loyalty. It's a forced acceptance and worship of something that is not based on truth, but idolatry. And, we are seeing an era of new enforcement, a new censorship, a new idol being created right in front of our eyes. It may not look exactly like this one, but it's doing the same thing. Even your classic liberal perspectives. Those are the ones who are typically more libertarian or advocates of free speech. Even they are being victimized by this new belief system. They are being, put out with cancel culture because they're refusing to buy into everything that's being said. And so while others are buying in and advocating for a whole new level of government censorship, there are some that are calling for, from the New York Times, they're calling for a reality czar, is what they have said and described it. It's very similar to what's called the Ministry of Truth from the book 1984, which, I think some are reading rather than it's, that's supposed to be a warning to a culture. 1984 is supposed to be a warning. Some people seem to be reading it rather like a guidebook. And so the New York Times published a piece on February 2nd, so just a couple of week or so ago, and one of the guys said this. He says, several experts I spoke with recommended that the Biden administration put together a cross-agency task force to tackle disinformation and domestic extremism, which would be led by something like a reality czar. And he says, I know it sounds a little dystopian, I'll grant, but let's hear them out. Because this would never end bad, right? Okay. This would never be a bad idea. This always turns out good when you have an arm of the government trying to say, this is what you're allowed to believe and think, and this is what you're not. That always turns out so well. I'm sure it will be so fair and balanced. And you know that on this panel, this task force, it will have an equal number of liberal and conservative experts, right? It'll be balanced, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think of the odds of it being balanced? Minus 5? All right, so it's not going to be a fair or a balanced type of thing. Any such agency, an agency in the hand of government, would ultimately destroy opposition, destroy any dissidents or opinions, but it will certainly not be a measure of reality, and it will certainly not be a measure of truth. You know, we can call out there that I want the truth, but they're going to be the ones to decide what the truth is. So instead, we need to fix our eyes on the one who is the way, and the truth, and the life. We need to focus more and more on Him. Because all of this closely follows the same pattern that we see in all of the end times prophecies in the book of Revelation that you hear believers talking about. All of this that we've been talking about in here in Daniel parallels exactly what the Antichrist does. And it doesn't really matter what you believe, which system you believe, the pattern fits. That you're going to have to bow down and worship. You're going to have to do so when we tell you to do so. You must worship what we tell you to do, when we tell you to do it, and if you don't do it, you will suffer. Every end time scenario follows that same pattern. And the scary thing is, or the sad thing is that most people are going to go along. Most people are going to conform. And Daniel even says that. He says, therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard, all the peoples, the nations and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Almost everybody went along with the program. And that is concerning, isn't it? So don't be shocked if you are alone when you don't go along. Don't be surprised when you are the one seen as the troublemaker, the selfish one, or the problem. We should expect that because everybody else is fine with it. The majority of the world will conform, but that is not really a good thing when they are conforming to things that are contrary to a true walk with God and obedience to the Scriptures. If everybody is bowing down and doing what is evil in the eyes of the Lord, and you are the one who is doing what is right in the eyes of the Lord, which one is better off? The one who does what is right in the eyes of the Lord is better off. So let that maybe give you some courage in the days ahead, because accusation will come as a part of all of this cycle of conformity. Accusation comes when you don't go along. He says, at that time, verse 8, certain Chaldeans came forward and denounced the Jews. And they spoke up and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, may the king live forever. Man, they're feeding him exactly what he wants. Yeah, you're not going to die. Your kingdom's not going to end. Listen to us, because we'll feed right into that. He says, you, O king, made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of a horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the golden image, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. Are they conforming? Are they going along with this edict? Sure they are. They're all for it. There are those who will be happy to go along with this new religion as a means of stroking the ego of the king or the president or whomever leader is out there. That was a brilliant action that you took, building that giant, golden idol. It's so beautiful. It's going to unite the kingdom. We should all have a common worship, inclusive worship that bends the universe to your will. Right, so they will want to use this new religion, this new idol, as a means of gaining power or regaining power. Getting power back, what they used to have. Remember, the Chaldeans that it said up here, certain Chaldeans, these were the native Babylonians. These were Nebuchadnezzar's people, an ethnic group, and they probably had a favored status until they couldn't explain the dream. When they could not tell the dream, what his dream was, when they could not explain its meaning, and then they told him that it couldn't be done, And then this young upstart Daniel comes along, and the king elevates him and his 3 friends up to power, putting them probably over many of those Chaldeans. They come forward and denounce the Jews. They knew exactly who to target and who to go after. And it's not really just these 4 Jews. It's really all the Jews. It's likely that these 4 men, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, were leading and providing an example to the other Jews that were taken off into exile. So what they did, the Jewish people did. What they didn't do, the Jewish community didn't do. And so if they did not bow to the idol, then they were encouraging other people not to bow to the idol. See, there are those within the country who will be looking for anyone who is not conforming, and the first people they will go after is the people of God. Right? Are we seeing any of that? I mean, Vicki was just telling me on a drive over here that Rabbi Greg Hirschberg mentioned that in certain sectors, or up in the Northeast or whatever, it was 3 out of 10 people are calling the coronavirus the Jew virus. Because of what, up in New York and things like that, the Jewish people are still gathering, they're still meeting together, they're not obeying Governor Cuomo, and so they're blaming them for the spread. And so it's being called the Jew virus by 3 out of 10 people. Could that be a problem?
Sure.
Yes, it can. Because who's going to be blamed and who's going to be targeted for violence and aggression? They will. Because the enemy wants to kill off the people of God. I'll be getting into some other stuff in just a little bit, but look at verse 12. It says, "There are certain Jews whom you appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those men pay no heed to you, O king. They do not serve your gods, nor will they worship the golden image that you have set up." So they're going after the people of God. So anyone who obeys God rather than men are a threat to the power of such a corrupt and antichrist government. And in the ancient world, in the modern world, doesn't really matter, there are those who want the government to be the highest authority, to be the God of the people. For the government to be the one that people look to, listen to, depend on, and to think on behalf of, and to think for. They want the government to think for people, and they want people to obey them. So the concept of things like rights, the concept of things like freedoms that our country was founded on, those things start with the assumption that our rights are unalienable and cannot be separated from us by any government because they are given by a higher authority than the government. Realize that? Government does not have the power to take these rights and freedoms away because they didn't grant them in the first place. The government exists to recognize these rights and create an environment where they can flourish. You look at the Declaration of Independence. Whoops, I'm missing the first part. Somehow I didn't get that one in there. The first part of the Declaration y'all probably know pretty well, right? "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." So all these rights come from a source and an authority higher than the government. Now, hopefully, the next part of that statement won't become illegal to say out loud in the future, because it's considered encouraging a rebellion or an insurrection. Have we had any discussions like that recently in the country? This is the very next phrase. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. That will preserve those rights that he just said. In some circles, that could get you in trouble. And it's moving in that direction more and more. See, Nebuchadnezzar was given a dream of his kingdom and his rule coming to an end. And so the golden idol was set up, was his attempt to alter the vision, to hold on to power, to prevent his kingdom from ending. And in contrast, our founding fathers, from the very moment, understood and anticipated and allowed for a time when this nation, for this nation that they were building would come to an end. And they didn't fear that end. They feared what their government could become or what it could make itself into, that the people would want to end it. They feared that. How bad does our government have to be for our people to want to do that? They understood the fallen and corrupted nature of humanity. They anticipated that even this government could one day, the one that they were still setting up, could one day become just as corrupt and trampling of rights as King George's. Right? Now, one of my favorite movies is a movie called The Patriots with Mel Gibson. Y'all seen that one before? There's some great lines in this movie. One of my favorites is this one. This is when he is standing up in the South Carolina legislature. He says, why should I trade one tyrant 3,000 miles away for 3,000 tyrants 1 mile away? An elected legislature can trample a man's rights as easily as a king can. So yes, this is a movie, but is that sentiment what they thought? Yeah. It sure is. There's another one that always got me as a pastor. It says, where a shepherd must tend to his flock. This is where he's being recruited to go out and join the militia. He says, and sometimes that means fighting off the wolves. That's a very powerful statement, because that's a lot of times fighting off the wolves takes many forms for a minister or a pastor. And so if y'all have ever heard of the Black Robe Regiment? Anybody heard anything about that? You should look it up. If you've never heard of it from the Revolutionary days, you should, because it's held by many that the Revolutionary War started in the pulpits of the churches long before the Declaration of Independence was ever written or signed. That the war would never have started and would never have continued and never would have won if the preachers in America had not taught that rights and freedoms first come from God. And here's a couple of quotes from that. It says, there is not a right asserted in the Declaration of Independence which had not been discussed by the New England clergy before 1763. 1763, that's more than 10 years plus before. And that's from the New England Clergy and the American Revolution, published in 1958. Are we having trouble?
Mm-hmm.
Is the battery dead?
Yeah. Just keep going.
That's supposed to be plugged up.
I know.
Another quote is this. It says, there was a class of clergymen and chaplains in the Revolution whom the British, when they once laid hands on them, treated with the most barbarous severity, dreading them for the influence they wielded and hating them for the obstinacy, courage, and enthusiasm they infused into the rebels. They violated all the usages of war among civilized nations in order to inflict punishment upon them. That's called The Chaplains and Clergy of the Revolution, published in 1864. All right, so it is no accident that in our day, churches and congregations have been targeted by a lot of this stuff. That the people of God are targeted and sometimes blamed, Jew and Christian. And remember, a lot of this started under the previous administration. This is not just a new thing hitting the current one. Different rules have been applied to churches than stores, bars, or places that they really want to have open because those provide tax revenue. Because the churches don't. But you can't gather, you can't meet in person or even in your parking lot to listen on the radio. You can't sing, you can't lay hands in prayer. As if the individual is no longer responsible to make decisions for themselves, to assess risk and value and necessity and act according to their conviction and be responsible for that decision. Just last week, the Supreme Court struck down California, one of their restrictions, California's church restrictions, and that many hailed it as a victory because they decided that they were treating the churches differently than the other businesses or things like that. But in many ways, that decision is not a victory.
They can't sing.
You're right. Because it leaves in place and essentially establishes legally and constitutionally that no, we can't treat churches differently, but we can still tell you what to do in your church. We can still tell you what your practices and what your service is going to be like. They can still interfere with the function of a church service. So you can only have a 25% capacity. You're not allowed to sing or chant, which would include, congregational reading. Because as people speak or sing, apparently we're just a big, hose of death when we sing. Now, some of the biggest, loudest, and most spray-inducing elements in many churches isn't the singing, it's the preaching, right? How many of y'all seen those guys that get rather riled up when they preach? Now that, I used to call the first few rows of the pews where everybody doesn't sit there. That's the splash zone, right? If you went to SeaWorld and things like that, where they always tell you if you sit in these certain seats, you're going to get wet when the whale starts jumping. Well, that's always the first couple of rows. So the pastor is really going to be the one who is the biggest spreader in this way of thinking, right? So for the purpose of public health, why is the preaching not included? Shouldn't it logically be included? And if they start thinking that, we should include the preacher in limiting what he does, in limiting what he says, that's not a big step. That's not a difficult thing to imagine them justifying. And that Supreme Court case just gave them the ability to do so. And so that now that the precedent is set, they can restrict what happens in a church service. And it's a small step for them to start claiming control of content. What I preach about, what we say, what we believe, what we sing about. You can sing if you sing certain songs. You can pray if you limit it to certain things. You can preach so long as we approve what you're saying. And we'll let you. But if you don't, then you can't do it. It's a small step to that kind of control. That's the kind of control that happens over in China all the time. And we are not there yet. But it's not like it's never happened before. And it's not like it isn't happening in other places in the world. And it's not like there aren't people looking for reasons to accuse and silence and intimidate the people of God, because they are the ones most likely to stand in the way of the powerful and the most likely not to conform to this new religion and this new narrative. It's the people of God who are going to be the threat. So there are certain Jews of whom you appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon. Those men pay no heed to you, O king. They do not serve your gods, nor will they worship the golden image that you have set up. So there is a new type of furnace being built for such people. And it's that cycle of conformity. And when they find such people, such targets for this new orthodoxy, they will provoke the government, the powers, to take actions against them. It's like, king, you said this, you did this, and there are certain people that are not listening to you. They're going to provoke them to do something about it. So what may start with just a few people here or there will quickly lead to all of them. That's what happens in places like China where with the Christian and now even the Muslim minorities. There's a genocide going on in China right now. Y'all heard about it? Not much is being said about it. It's being mostly ignored in the Western media by Disney, by the NBA, because they're going in there and making deals for the money. And And they'll ignore all this other stuff and this killing of hundreds of thousands of people because there's a paycheck involved. It's happened in Germany to the Jews. It happened during the Inquisition to the Jews and everybody that was not Catholic. It happened in Daniel's day, and it also happened a few decades later in Persia with Esther, which we're going to be celebrating together in just a couple of weeks. Thursday the 25th. Esther and Purim are another example of how some Jews becomes all Jews, and how that they were laid out for destruction and purging from the kingdom. It's the same pattern that the enemy has always had toward the people of God ever since Noah. There's a reason why there was only 8 people left, because of the evil and destruction of the world. They had killed everybody else who claimed to be interested in the things of God. So these Jews, these people of God, don't listen to you. They don't bow to you, king. Now what are you going to do about it? And so he gets mad. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar ordered Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be summoned. When these men were brought before the king, Nebuchadnezzar responded to them, saying, "Is it true? Are you one of those? Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you don't serve my gods or worship the golden image that I set up?" So the fury of the king, the fury of the authority of the government is provoked against these 3. Daniel, he's not listed. He's back at the royal court. The king's opinion about him is solid. But these guys who were just elevated to these governor positions in the region, they can still be taken out. The king hears the accusations. He calls them in. He questions them. He is basically saying, look, I gave you positions of power and influence. You have to follow my orders and decrees. Otherwise, there are going to be consequences. This is an ultimatum that always comes. The ultimatum always comes when the powers are ignored. So here's your chance. Here's your chance to prove your loyalty to me. Just conform, just bow, just submit, or die. And no God can save you from my hand. That's what he says next. Now, if you are ready, this is the chance. This is the opportunity that everybody's going to be given. If you're not conforming, hey, we'll give you another chance to get right. If you are ready, at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image that I have made. But if you do not worship, you will immediately be thrown into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. Then what God will be able to deliver you out of my hands? See, now we have not had to face these kind of moments in this country for some time. Yes, there have been some legal challenges. Yes, there have been some threats of arrest and fines. Your businesses can be closed if you don't take certain pictures or bake certain cakes or close when we tell you to, or hire who we tell you to, or pay for abortion even if you're pro-life. We've come at you in small ways so far. It's not come to a life or death decision for us, but we need to understand that here in this country, we are the exception to that, not the rule. We are the exception. Our brothers and sisters in Messiah, the Jewish people, are facing these kind of moments all around the world, and they have been doing so for a very long time. Our time of peace and freedom to worship according to our convictions is the unusual time. This is the out of the ordinary time of moments that we cannot count on continuing forever. But when these moments come, and I pray they don't, but we are starting to see the handwriting on the wall, are we not? That's Daniel chapter 5, by the way, where that phrase comes from. What kind of response should we have? What does God hope to see in his people? What kind of faith should we have on display? And when I go out and I talk to people, with the hospice as a chaplain and such like that, I use this passage from Daniel and 1 Peter in combination. I use them a lot to teach about the important lesson to those who are facing death and in need of a miracle. I use 1 Peter and this passage out of Daniel a lot. 1 Peter says this: by trusting, you are being protected by God's power for a salvation that is ready to be revealed in the last time. And you rejoice in this greatly, even though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been distressed by various trials. It says these trials are so that the true metal of your faith, which is far more valuable than gold, even a head of gold like Babylon, which perishes though refined by fire, so that your faith may come to light in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Messiah Yeshua. May be proven genuine is how some translations put it. See, I don't believe it's an accident that Peter is using the language of a fiery furnace that refines and removes the impurities of our faith. He may very well have had Daniel 3 in mind when he was writing this. That refining by fire is exactly what Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are going through, and they are facing it. So we must understand that God values our faith much more than our comfort and our ease. He wants to see our faith come to light. He wants our faith to be purified. He wants all those impurities to be removed from us. So our trials are to increase our faith and dependence upon Him. They are to show us that He is our light, our life, and our salvation, and to value Him more than any promise or seduction from this world. That's why these moments come. And so that it might result in praise, glory, and honor, not of ourselves, but of Him, when Messiah Yeshua is revealed. So listen to the response, this statement of faith from these young men in the face of this life-threatening conformity and the full weight and authority of the most powerful nation on earth. It says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, saying, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to answer you concerning this matter. How do you think that went over? I don't need to tell you nothing. That probably made the king even more mad, would be my guess. They were basically saying that they were not concerned with what Nebuchadnezzar thought of them, that his opinion of them did not really matter or enter into their thought process. They were also saying that the answer Nebuchadnezzar was going to get is not going to really come from their words. They can say all kinds of things, but that's not really what's going to be the most important answer he gets. They fully expected, especially in the light of Nebuchadnezzar boasting that no God would actually be able to rescue them from him. They fully expected that the God of Israel was going to demonstrate just how small Nebuchadnezzar really was. That God is the sovereign, that He is the one in authority, not Nebuchadnezzar. And so we need to have that same kind of attitude and understanding, fully believing that this is true. We must believe and let God answer the accusations. We must let God answer the charges. We must trust His opinion of us and not what the accusations in those of the world say. We must obey God rather than men, as the Apostle Peter talks about in Acts chapter 4. Because these men certainly did. They fully believed and trusted God. And the important thing is, they believed Him and trusted Him whether a miracle came or not. He says, if it is so, if this is going to happen, our God, whom we serve, is able. He is able to save us from the furnace of blazing fire, and He will deliver us out of your hand, O King. Okay? They are fully confident that God is able to do those things. But look what he says next. He says, yet, even if He does not, let it be known to you, O King, that we will not serve your gods, nor worship the golden image that you set up. That is such a strong statement of faith, one that we must come to understand and adopt ourselves in light of all of the intolerance coming in the name of unity disguised as enforced conformity. We must likewise trust God whether the miracle we want comes or not, whether the deliverance we want happen or not, whether our job is saved or not, whether he saves us from the threatened punishment or not. We must be resolved that we will obey God rather than men, and we will not conform to the gods of this world or whatever idol they set up, because what's happening here in the book of Daniel is exactly what we're starting to see things happen in our day. And it's exactly the same kind of thing that's going to happen in the future with the Antichrist on the scene. This is the enemy's playbook, and he's played it a lot. He does it over and over and over again. It has not really changed. The enemy will threaten. He'll bring us before the courts. He'll put us on trial, slander, defame, ridicule, and abuse. He'll turn public opinion against us. He'll convince everyone that we are the danger and that we are the threat, and that everything they do to punish us will be justified in the eyes of the majority. Y'all see that pattern? And they will always give you maybe one more chance to cave and conform. And the enemy lies and promises that all of your pain, all of your suffering will stop if you just curse God and renounce Him. That's the lie. You will have to stand by your decision for God. And this is what we need to know. You'll have to stand by your decision for God many times, not just once. And every time it's going to get a little harder. But you don't want to give the enemy victory. Because regardless of whether a miracle comes or not, God will justify you. He will rule justly on your behalf, on our actions. He can and will rescue us, and He does rescue His people from the hand of such authorities. We have many accounts of that. And sometimes He may rescue us by taking His children home. And we have to be prepared mentally and spiritually to have our faith so refined that even if we know that the miracle won't come, we will still not compromise our walk. Even if He's told us ahead of time, it's like, you know what? By the way, the Lord told me we're not getting out of this. Are you still going to have that kind of response? We also have to believe that there will be times and moments when His glory will fall and He will thwart and astound the powerful in their rage. So we trust Him whether the miracle comes or not. But we also still need to believe that, yeah, He can do it. Look at what comes next. And then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with rage, and the appearance of his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We say the Aaronic blessing, may the Lord make His face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up His countenance towards you. Y'all know that passage? This is the opposite of that. The appearance of his face changed from one of blessing to one of, oh, it's over. He ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than it was normally heated, and commanded some of the mighty men in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the furnace of blazing fire. So these men, wearing their robes, tunics, hats, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. But because the king's order was so urgent and the furnace was so extremely hot, a raging flame killed those men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It was so bad that it killed the guards, essentially. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the midst of the furnace of the blazing fire. See, this is the thing about God that we need to also try to understand. Even when God is planning on intervening, because does He plan on intervening in this situation? Does He know He's going to intervene? Yes. God knows exactly what He's going to do. that doesn't mean you're not going to get thrown in. All right? He does not intervene by, Star Trek transporting them out of there. He doesn't beam them up. All right? Neither did he put out the fire. Neither did he make it impossible for the guards to throw them in. Instead, what makes all the difference is that his presence went with them into the valley of the shadow of death. His presence was there. They did not fear because he was with them. And with all of this, the king Nebuchadnezzar thought the victory was his. He thought he proved how much power he had, but he quickly learned otherwise to the glory of God when Yeshua HaMashiach is revealed in the last times. Because this is a picture of that. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and leapt to his feet. He asked his ministers, didn't we cast, I thought there was only 3 of them. Didn't we cast 3 men bound into the middle of the fire? And they replied to the king, yeah, that's right, you can count. We all counted. But he answered, saying, look, behold, I see 4 men walking about unbound and unharmed in the middle of the fire. And the 4th has the appearance like a son of the gods. We only threw in 3, and now there's 4, and they ain't dead. Something's going on. This is that kind of picture there. They're thrown into this type of furnace in a situation that there's no way they should survive. The world's authorities, the powers and dominions are not so in charge as they think they are. Because they still work and operate with the rules that God has set up. They think they understand how this world operates, but God operates on a much higher level. Fire normally destroys, but it does nothing to him. Because he is a consuming fire in his own right. God is a consuming fire, and the consuming fire, you can imagine Yeshua standing around in there with those guys in the furnace that's 7 times hotter than it normally is. He's like, guys, this ain't hot, trust me. This ain't hot. So it goes on. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace. Probably didn't get too close because it had already killed some of his men. He approached the furnace of blazing fire and exclaimed, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. It's almost like the same kind of call that Lazarus got coming out of the tomb. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the middle of the fire. They just strutted right out like nothing was happening. But notice that the most powerful king on the planet is starting to realize that he is out of his league. That God is above his pay grade. That Nebuchadnezzar cannot control, he cannot overpower, he cannot manipulate, he cannot bribe the Most High God to his will or execute God's servants. So there is nothing Nebuchadnezzar can do to thwart the will of God. If God wants someone to live, no power on the earth can kill them. Everyone was so amazed that they apparently examined these 3 people very carefully. They checked their hair, their clothes, even how they smell. It says when all of these governors, all of these leaders of the nation, the satraps, administrators, governors, royal ministers had gathered around, they saw that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men. Not a hair of their head was singed. So how close were they? What kind of an inspection were they getting? They were like, dude, you're still alive. How is this possible? Nor were their robes scorched, nor was there a smell of fire on them. So they were going up and smelling them. That's how amazed they were. Notice who's doing it. It's a lot of those people, it's some of those people who did the accusing and tried to start this whole situation in the first place. They were witnesses of these things. They should be learning not to mess with Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And I kind of wonder, when things settle down and everybody goes back home, I kind of wonder if they start using their Hebrew names in private a little bit more and not calling them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's like, We're not going to name those gods. We're going to name your God. But, these are the kind of moments that may come in our future. And we may be afraid of persecution. We may be intimidated of threat. We may want to avoid it at all costs. I can completely sympathize with that. But it is in such moments that God may open the door of opportunity for His glory to be revealed. And the plans of kings may change. The circle of conformity may be broken, and freedoms can be restored when God moves and He works in power and in glory. Nebuchadnezzar exclaimed, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent His angel and delivered His servants who trusted in Him. They defied the king's edict and gave up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. So therefore I hereby decree that any people, nation, or language that says anything slanderous against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be torn limb from limb, and their house made a pile of rubble, because there is no other God that is able to deliver in this way." Negotiations are over, and He's going to do His own thing. Boy, if we can't, I wish this edict was still in force, don't you? Anybody who slandered after the God of Daniel and those men. And then, to make it worse, if they weren't already in a high position already, above those Chaldeans who were jealous and wanted to get them torn down, well, then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon and elevated them even higher. Good job. That plan worked out really well. Then King Nebuchadnezzar, to all peoples, nations, and languages who dwell in all the earth, may your peace abound. That's what he is looking for. And so in all of this, Daniel wasn't there for this. But do you think he heard about it? You bet he did. I'm sure he got told the story. He says, "It seemed good to me to declare the signs and wonders that God Most High has done for me. How great are His signs, how mighty are His wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, His dominion from generation to generation." So depending on who is talking here, this could be Daniel, this could be Nebuchadnezzar. But if it's Nebuchadnezzar, he's no longer trying to make his kingdom last forever. He is acknowledging that God's kingdom will last forever. His authority and dominion from generation belong to God. And we must believe that that is true. That regardless of what nation is on the earth, and no matter what kingdom is in control, any of those that were listed in the vision in the first place, none of them replace God's kingdom. None of them are more real or more powerful than God's kingdom. God's kingdom is supreme. So no matter what is going on here, no matter what restrictions, no matter what freedoms or persecutions, His justice will be done, even if it's denied here. And because one day, every knee will bow, and every tongue will confess that Yeshua is Lord of all, to the glory of God the Father. So we must be resolved in that truth and live with courage and conviction in the midst of all of this.